What happens when you combine crowns, confidential state matters, and a liquor cabinet shrouded in silence? The result is a potent mix of influence and a lingering hangover. Behind the grandeur and the gilded frames, the British royal family has long grappled with concealed struggles. Queens turned to opiates, kings drowned their sorrows in gin, and sedatives were discreetly sanctioned at the palace. This is not merely a tale of scandal. It reveals a legacy of addiction draped in luxurious fabric. For some, alcohol served as a balm for the weight of the crown, while others sought refuge from its pressures. Yet, all were complicit in maintaining this facade. These are the royal narratives left out of textbooks, a history still cloaked in secrecy and reluctance. As we prepare to explore these clandestine lives, don't forget to subscribe, ensuring you never miss our journey into the hidden depths of the past. And let me ask you, where in the world are you tuning in from? What time is it there as we unveil these royal enigmas? Share in the comments. Let's discover just how far these untold tales reach tonight. In the realm of history, few figures loom as large as George IV, the Prince Regent who later ascended to the throne. Born into a life of privilege, he was fated to struggle with its weight. Before he donned the crown, George was already entrenched in the Regency era's lavish excesses. He embodied royal indulgence, with an aversion to moderation so profound that he even envisioned a bedroom adorned with mirrors and gilded dolphins. He considered himself a ruler, yet it was his revelries that seemed to take center stage. Behind the opulence of Carlton House lay a man drowning in self-made chaos, intoxicated by a concoction of vices. Alcohol was his steadfast companion, with brandy at breakfast, wine with meals, and port consumed as if it were mere hydration. This was soon joined by laudanum, a morphine-laden tincture masquerading as medicine, hailed by physicians as therapeutic but treated by George as a morning ritual. By the time he became Prince Regent in 1811, the kingdom was governed by a man thoroughly sedated. Historians later unearthed evidence of his growing dependence on opiates to find rest, quell anxiety, and even to face the mirror. His corset was worn so tightly it left permanent indentations, a testament to his obsessive vanity. Numbness became his solace. Yet the charade was meticulously preserved. Public appearances took on a theatrical quality, with slurred speech portrayed as mere eccentricity and his swollen figure romanticized as dignified. His frequent disappearances were cloaked in a vague, chronic ailment that never seemed to fade. Court physicians acted as complicit accomplices, more invested in upholding the illusion of a king than in his treatment. Thus, the narrative spun, portraying the Prince Regent as a figure of extravagant cheer rather than a tragic soul ensnared by addiction, a truth confined within the palace walls. Even family members navigated the fine line between concern and concealment. As the years passed, his health deteriorated dramatically, but none dared voice the reality. Gout, obesity, and what modern experts suspect was opiate toxicity clouded his existence. His teeth decayed, eyesight dimmed, and his mind sank deeper into narcotic haze. Nevertheless, the spectacle persisted. It was only posthumously, after his passing in 1830, that the facade began to crumble. Correspondence surfaced, medical documentation re-emerged, unveiling the story of a monarch who ruled obscured by addiction, both charismatic and tragically lost. And as we turn the page, it becomes clear that George IV's tale is not isolated. The next monarch in line grappled with profound grief, pain, and the reliance on a cabinet full of bottles, with consequences felt throughout the kingdom. 2. Queen Anne. History often casts a long shadow over Queen Anne, marked by the sorrowful tale of her 17 pregnancies, none yielding a surviving heir. Yet, this accounts for only part of her life story. The remainder plays out behind closed doors, within the dim, perfumed confines of private chambers steeped in laudanum and candlelight, where suffering was not just endured but also treated. Reigning from 1702 to 1714, Anne's period was transformative. She guided the Acts of Union, steered through the tumult of the War of the Spanish Succession, and laid down a constitutional foundation whose impacts are still felt in British politics today. Yet, the Anne presented in official narratives is a curated version, flattened, glossed over, and strategically depicted in suffering. The true and wrestled with relentless pain, a torment that stripped her of dignity and overshadowed her existence. Her struggles with health began early and never ceased, a harrowing array of conditions: rheumatoid arthritis, gout, obesity, migraines, all culminating in dependence on alcohol and opiate medicines. Among these, laudanum was the most sought-after remedy, a heady mix of alcohol and powdered opium presented in elegant bottles with handwritten notes. It calmed her nerves, dulled her agony, and cradled the last Stuart monarch into sleep, even sedating her during council meetings. To her courtiers, and was often indisposed, an all-too-gentle euphemism for a queen too medicated to walk unassisted, too burdened with grief to leave her bed, or simply too numb to engage with the affairs of state. Yet, at that time, this was not perceived as addiction. Rather, it was framed as a royal obligation. Physicians rationalized her treatment as a solemn duty to the public. After all, what is a queen if not able to fulfill her responsibilities? The complexity of Anne's relationships further unravels the extent of her concealed struggles. Consider Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, once Anne's closest ally, a political strategist, and ultimately her rival. Their public quarrels were anything but subtle, yet their correspondence subtly hints at Anne's growing detachment due to her reliance on increasingly potent remedies. In a rare moment of candor, Sarah remarked on how Anne's judgment seemed clouded by her medicines, a pointed observation even by 18th century standards. This troubling decline was far from inconspicuous. Despite her evident struggles, her slurred speech, her foggy memory, her abruptly shortened public engagements, the nation was blind to her reality, or rather, was shown only what it was deemed fit to see: a devout, patient monarch bravely bearing unspeakable burdens. The opiates, the alcohol, the incessant pain, these remained mere annotations tucked away in physicians' notes, whispered about in hushed drawing rooms, where servants understood the boundaries of silence. Queen Anne passed away in 1714, her body bloated and immobile, likely still under the lingering effects of the substances that were meant to heal her. An autopsy detailed significant organ decay, but contemporary reports turned focus toward her legacy rather than her physical state. As with many before and after her, she was immortalized in myth before even the faintest truths could emerge. Yet, she would not be the last royal silenced by a troubled existence disguised behind elegance. Decades later, a glamorous, modern woman would navigate a similarly confining labyrinth, catching the rapacious eye of the tabloids. If these revelations about Queen Anne have sparked your curiosity, don't forget to subscribe to explore more secrets lurking in the shadows of royalty. And as we continue, where are you tuning in from? What time is it in your corner of the world as we uncover these royal enigmas? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm eager to see how far these tales are spreading tonight. 3. Let us delve into the life of Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. She was the younger sister, infused with glamour, the playful royal known for smoking in public, donning Dior ahead of the Queen's endorsement, and sipping cocktails long before noon, because wired here to norms. The British press hailed her as bold, while the palace labelled her as complicated. Yet neither fully acknowledged the shadow creeping into her narrative, her growing dependency. Princess Margaret's existence was a tapestry of contradictions. Born as the second daughter in the royal line, destined to never seize the throne, She was nurtured in the gilded halls of privilege and yet irresistibly attracted to its murkier depths. For years, her public persona fluctuated between the vivacious party girl and a melancholic romantic, an individual who indulged in champagne-fueled mystique while silently battling despair. Alcohol wasn't merely a backdrop to her life. It became the framework. It framed her mornings, punctuated her afternoons, and infused her evening socials, which grew increasingly obligatory. Gin before lunch, wine accompanying meals, whiskey to conclude the night, always served neat. In private circles, the tales of her drinking were legendary, whispered within the palace, downplayed by press officers as a royal quirk, a touch of mood management. Yet, beneath the vibrant sheen of her jet-setting life, the luxurious Caribbean retreats, eccentric aristocratic friends, and chains smoking by the pool, lay a pattern of drinking that many misconstrued as her personality. And thus, her struggles remained veiled, for Margaret's addiction wore a mask of charm. Or at least it did initially. By the 1960s, those around her sensed that her indulgences were morphing into something more troubling. Instances of forgetfulness, sudden mood shifts, last-minute cancellations, and unexplained gaps in her royal duties became glaringly apparent. She gradually retreated from family events, often citing fatigue or vague ailments coinciding suspiciously with major family gatherings. Insiders were aware of her struggles, but acknowledging them would have challenged not just a royal figure but the integrity of the monarchy itself. In response, discreet physicians were enlisted, prescribing sedatives and sleeping pills intended to alleviate her rising anxiety. Like many before her, Margaret found herself ensnared in a cycle of pharmaceuticals, blurring the distinctions between treatment and dependency. There were reports of her mixing prescriptions with alcohol, casually combining substances, and self-dosing for public appearances, a precarious balancing act she attempted while donning high heels, and not always with poise. By the 1980s, the consequences could no longer be concealed beneath layers of silk. Her health faltered, culminating in strokes and liver failure. Yet, the public narrative blissfully ignored the reality of her situation. She remained the Queen's rebellious sister, the life of gatherings in media recollections, even as her body whispered distress signals. The royal PR apparatus safeguarded her image right to the end. Margaret passed away in 2002 after enduring a series of strokes, with the official cause of death remaining stubbornly detached from her lifelong battles with addiction. In the flood of tributes, only a whisper mentioned her years of struggle with alcohol. Instead, it was all tiaras and tragedies, as if the royal establishment preferred to frame her legacy as an anecdote rather than a cautionary tale. Yet, her story was not singular. It resonated powerfully with another royal, whose secrets lay buried beneath layers of military accolades, genteel discretion, and Cold War fears. In the shadows of royal intrigue lies Prince George, Duke of Kent, the striking son of George V. If one were to craft an epitome of royal mystery, Prince George would fit that mold perfectly. With his distinguished looks, worldly charm, and cultured demeanor, he commanded attention without uttering a word, only to slip away from the spotlight just as effortlessly. His existence was a web of contradictions, a naval officer entangled in the allure of high society, a Windsor who radiated a certain cinematic flair, and a devoted family man encircled by a cadre of eccentrics, artists, and exiles. Beneath the surface, concealed within his polished conduct and regal entitlements, lay a man wrestling with deep-seated addictions, so well concealed that even official records seemed wary of acknowledging them. Born in 1902 as the fourth son of King George V and Queen Mary, the weight of royal expectations pressed heavily upon him, offering prestige without actual power. Like many of his royal contemporaries, he wandered into the glittering margins where aristocracy flirted with rebellion. He spoke several languages, pursued musical studies, and engaged in diplomacy, all while donning tailored suits that conveyed an air of cinematic elegance. Yet, he was inexorably drawn to the underbelly of London, the cabarets, the clubs, intimate gatherings that pulsed with a blend of glamour and self-destruction. As the inner turmoil of the world intensified, whispers of his substance use began to creep into social conversations, not the genteel drinking typical of aristocracy, but far darker entanglements. Rumors, shrouded in ambiguity, hinted at his possible use of morphine, cocaine, and various prescription drugs, which, while not uncommon among the elite of the 1920s and 30s, were particularly scandalous for someone of his ilk. Thus, the truth was carefully hidden. Biographers, even years later, approached the delicate topic with the caution of archaeologists navigating a field of landmines. Some hinted at medical treatments for anxiety, while others alluded to experimental therapies during his time in Germany and Switzerland. Through this veil of euphemism, a complex man emerges, one attempting to alleviate not only physical pain but also profound emotional suffering. One enduring rumor centers around his association with Dr. John Bodkin Adams, a physician scrutinized for mysterious patient fatalities and the overprescription of opiates. Though concrete evidence remains elusive, correspondence reveals that George had connections with doctors who prescribed medications both liberally and discreetly. This, alongside his established use of sedatives and stimulants, crafts a portrait of a dependency masked by an exterior of elegance and poise. His untimely demise in 1942 added yet another layer of enigma. Official accounts cited his death in a plane crash in northern Scotland while he served in the military, the first royal to die in active service in over 5 centuries, a tragedy met with both reverence and national grief. Yet, the circumstances surrounding the crash are perplexingly unclear. Flight records contain discrepancies, passenger lists confuse, and doubts linger about the very reason Prince George was on that flight. Speculation abounds among conspiracy theorists, suggesting that his substance use may have played a role, while others speculate that the incident served as a cover for a burgeoning scandal. Both theories remain unproven yet equally plausible. One thing is unmistakable: the royal establishment acted swiftly to shield his legacy. Archives were sealed, diaries mysteriously disappeared, and his life was reframed as a narrative of noble service devoid of the chaos that lingered in his later years. Even now, historians striving to piece together his complex story encounter locked doors and absent documentation. Yet, Prince George's experience is not unique. Another royal, a future king, would walk a similar tightrope, grappling with personal demons under the relentless gaze of the media and a society unwilling to confront the truth. 5. Edward VII, also known as Albert Edward, emerged as the playboy prince turned an unlikely monarch, his youth a tapestry woven with scandals, romances, and the haze of cigar smoke. Historians might diplomatically label his rule as one of diplomacy, but lurking behind his meticulously groomed beard and the dignified portraits lies a hidden truth, an addiction that wouldn't grace the pages of history books. This was not due to a lack of awareness, but rather the cultural reluctance to acknowledge such struggles. Alcohol was his steadfast companion, not the refined sips of aristocratic dinners, but a more entrenched dependency, a fixture in his daily rituals. For Edward, imbibing was not mere leisure, but an integral part of his existence, marking every gathering from exclusive clubs to royal carriages, from lavish Parisian soirees to formal dinners. He didn't just drink during meals, he tailored the meals to the drinking. Legendary breakfasts often included champagne, while his evenings brought forth an array of cocktails, cherry, port, brandy, and whatever else was at hand. Yet, society refrained from labeling this as a problem. Instead, it was celebrated as a display of elegance. Bertie embodied the sheer opulence of the early 20th century, flanked by Cuban cigars, bespoke suits from Savile Row, and a retinue of chefs, valets, and doctors whose primary role was to mitigate the effects of his extravagant lifestyle. His indulgences, the affairs, grand feasts, and perpetual social engagements, demanded a kind of resilience, aided by alcohol, or so it seemed, until it gradually took its toll. For years, the press and the palace engaged in a careful ballet around his drinking habits, framing them as harmless delights, charming excesses. Yet insiders whispered about his flushed visage, his bloated physique, and his irritated demeanor when sober, relying on tonic wines and fortified spirits to steady himself before occasions. Publicly, he was always the cheerful figure, brimming with life. Even his weight, a byproduct of rich dining and continuous drinking, was spun as jolly rather than indicative of deeper issues. Behind the curtains, his medical team knew the reality. Royal physician Sir William Gull maintained thorough records, many of which remained sealed during Edward's life, revealing tales of swollen organs and hints of cardiovascular distress, with congested liver surfacing repeatedly. Rather than take action, the medical team opted for symptom management, serving the institution rather than addressing the man's needs. By the time Edward claimed the throne in 1901, following Queen Victoria's passing, his habits were entrenched beyond redemption. Approaching 60, his regal tenure spanned a mere 9 years, a brief yet symbolically significant epoch within royal chronicles. It was an era marked by imperial decline and intricate diplomacy, roles Edward performed with a charming facade. Yet, behind the luxuries and the polished public image lay a body silently bearing the consequences. Upon his death in 1910 from a series of heart attacks, the narrative was simple: overwork from a king devoted to his empire. Yet, his physicians discerned ailments better attributed to his lifelong habits: hypertension, arteriosclerosis, liver congestion. Yet again, alcoholism was never uttered, a term utterly out of sync with the times, likely erased from any obituary. Edward VI's existence serves as a poignant reminder of royal euphemism, a figure whose affability was apparent, but whose addiction was buried beneath the conventions of court life. He drank with zest, lived vibrantly, and suffered without scrutiny. In contrast, his successor, a more restrained and austere figure, would navigate a quieter route, illustrating that loud excesses were not the sole path to downfall. Often, it's the silence coupled with stress and a physician who might overlook the truth that leads to the same tragic end. 6. George V. If Edward III was the emblem of lavish joy, his son George V stood as the embodiment of stern restraint, characterized by duty and a deep-seated aversion to frivolity. He once remarked, "I cannot comprehend boredom. I am never bored." Yet, one can't help but perceive that such a declaration hints at an inner struggle, a man possibly running on empty. Publicly, George V wore the mantle of the resolute monarch during World War I, serving as the stabilizing force at the heart of a disintegrating empire, a royal figure exuding the quintessential stiff upper lip. Unlike his father, George did not seek the limelight or indulge in scandals. Still, beneath the surface, the absence of public scandal did not equate to true virtue. It was a manifestation of control, a reality that often demanded its own coping mechanisms. Early on, George's health was tenuous. With chronic bronchitis, digestive troubles, and stress-related conditions, he became the perfect candidate for the palace's emerging trend of medical management. By this era, the use of L-Dinum had faded, but more modern sedatives, painkillers, and sleep aids entered his daily routine, administered with care rather than scandal. His private physician, Lord Dawson of Penn, a prominent figure in British medicine, ensured his notes indicated a treatment plan that transcended mere aspirin. Each day was meticulously ordered, just like his medications. Certain tonics were prescribed to facilitate sleep while others fortified him for public appearances. Coupled with his heavy smoking habit, which once peaked at over 20 cigarettes daily, George V was a man not existing in a natural state, but rather under the influence of various pharmaceuticals. Then there was the matter of alcohol. Less flamboyant than Edward's excesses, George's drinking habits were constant yet discreet. He favoured gin, port, and scotch during the evenings, although palace staff noted that his drinking sessions started earlier as he aged. Nevertheless, the palace maintained an air of ambiguity regarding his consumption, referring to it as customary or medicinal spirits, crafting euphemisms to preserve the image of the king's sobriety and moral standing. Ironically, George V's reign unfolded during a time when global attitudes towards alcohol were shifting dramatically. In the United States, prohibition was taking hold, while the British populace leaned towards temperance, seemingly oblivious to their monarch's private indulgences amidst the national turmoil. As his reign progressed, his reliance on medication escalated. By the mid-1930s, George faced persistent pain, struggling to walk unassisted and increasingly dependent on morphine and cocaine derivative solutions. It was Lord Dawson himself who, in a controversial act, administered the lethal injection that marked the end of George's life in 1936, a calculated choice to ensure the passing would feature in the morning papers rather than the evening tabloids. While the public narrative painted a picture of a serene departure, surrounded by loved ones, and bearing the crown until the end, it masked a reality ruled by pharmaceuticals rather than grace. Tragically, this wasn't enough to shield the next heir from an even quicker unraveling. For when addiction collides with abdication, the repercussions extend far beyond the personal. They resonate through the very fabric of the Constitution. 7. The story of George VI is one shrouded in unexpected twists. Originally, the crown was destined for his older brother, yet fate intervened, leaving George, known affectionately as Bertie to his confidants, in the shadows. A timid second son, he often stood on the periphery, quietly bearing royal duties, never anticipating the monumental role he would be compelled to assume. The year was 1936 when the unexpected abandonment of Edward VIII cast George into the spotlight. Suddenly, he inherited not just a kingdom but a global crisis, weighed down by the soaring expectations of a nation. His legacy, however, is often overshadowed by a secret battle, a relentless and unacknowledged dependence on alcohol. Today, George VI's narrative is often saluted as one of resilience. The stuttering leader who steered Britain through the turmoil of World War II has been celebrated as the reluctant champion who found his voice at a time of dire need. It's a compelling tale, heavily rooted in truth, yet it omits crucial aspects. Beyond the staunch broadcasts and regal portraits lies a man plagued by anxiety and burdened by pressure, where drinking morphed from indulgence to necessity. The famous battle with his speech impediment, highlighted in the acclaimed film The King's Speech, merely scratched the surface of his deeper struggles with anxiety and self-doubt. In the quiet shadows, a routine of drinking emerged, gradually blurring the line between coping mechanism and dependency. By the early 1940s, insiders in the court began to take note of his growing reliance on alcohol. His daily life featured potent cocktails before lunch, wine or whiskey with meals, and increasingly earlier nightcaps. The enduring justification centered on the stress of war, the demands of the crown, and the scrutiny of the public eye. While direct confrontation was unthinkable, those close to him began molding schedules and expectations around his moods. Medical professionals addressed his concerns with familiar treatments, sedatives for sleep and stimulants for alertness, yet their oversight never escalated to serious intervention. As the years progressed, his physical health began to decline. Stomach pains, fatigue, and by the close of the 1940s, more alarming symptoms that were handled delicately in the public realm. Even his once heroic voice began to falter, not simply due to a speech impediment but from a deeper, chemical influence. As his health deteriorated, the royal household tightened its grip on information. Smoking was cited as a cause for lung cancer, while fatigue was blamed for his myriad absences. Yet, alcohol remained an unspoken issue, inconvenient to the wartime hero narrative they sought to maintain, the steadfast father of the nation who walked among the afflicted. Thus, the truth of his drinking stayed hidden, comprehensible only to those designated to keep it veiled. When he passed away in 1952, the world mourned a devoted leader who, by all accounts, had sacrificed immensely for his nation. His eulogies celebrated his resolve and dignity under pressure. Yet, personal records and correspondence reveal a more somber story. George VI was not only a king encumbered by his duties, he was also a man entangled in dependence, surviving day by day through a fragile equilibrium of substances that masked his internal unraveling. It wouldn't be long before the royal figure who had once altered the course of his own life for Bertie would emerge again, this time as a man in exile, cocktail in hand, liberated from the need to hide any longer. 8. Edward VII, later known as the Duke of Windsor. He left it all behind for love, or so the narrative claims. A king who chose to abdicate his throne for a woman that the establishment loathed. This version resonates through time, neat and romantic, almost cinematic. Yet, like many tales of royalty, it comes with a significant omission. Beneath that grand act, Edward VII was a man already fraying at the edges, and love might not have been his sole pursuit. A deeper craving existed, one marked by the allure of spirits. Edward's growing reliance on alcohol was hardly flattering in pictures. He appeared too polished, impeccably dressed, and ostentatiously uninvolved. Even following his abdication in 1936, when he should have felt liberated from monarchical duties, the palace's public relations machine focused solely on his romantic exile. In reality, Edward's battle with alcohol predated Wallis Simpson's entrance into his life. As the Prince of Wales, he cultivated a reputation for defiance masked by charm. Dashing and modern, he abhorred responsibility, traversing the empire like a celebrity on a world tour rather than a future king in search of wisdom. He flitted from jazz joints in New York to lavish colonial balls in Bombay, navigating his existence with the easy detachment of someone frequently intoxicated. Addiction, back then, was merely charisma. Those around him took note. His aides revealed that he required stiff drinks to navigate formal dinners and arrived at public gatherings already at ease, appearing more engaged after a few cocktails than at the onset of events. His tolerance was legendary. His discipline, however, was not. After abdicating, the restraints of monarchy vanished, and with them, any leftover moderation. Living in France and later in the Bahamas unfurled a surreal sense of freedom. Edward and Wallis inhabited grand estates, attended lavish gatherings, acquired antiques, and drank incessantly, gin in the morning, wine at lunch, scotch before dinner, and nightcaps thereafter. This was their rhythm, their escape, saturating each social engagement. When no event summoned them, their private lives mirrored that intoxicated pattern. Within diplomatic circles, the Duke of Windsor was perceived as a challenging man to plan around, particularly after nightfall. American officials stationed near him in the 1940s, while he governed the Bahamas, quietly documented his erratic behavior, foggy memories, and habitual lateness. The cocktail glass rarely left his hand. Conversations grew looser, occasionally slurring. Reports drifted back to London, softened by courtiers bound to safeguard the former king's image. Meanwhile, Wallis played her role, sometimes hosting, sometimes caring. Their relationship took on a curious codependence, elegantly presented yet tattered beneath the surface. She orchestrated his schedule, managed public appearances, and poured his drinks as meticulously as she selected his attire. Whatever love existed in their union was shrouded in a haze of routine, a dance choreographed around meticulously curated environments and calculated intoxication. Even into old age, Edward's drinking continued. Snapshots from the 1960s reveal a thinner, more fragile man impeccably groomed, maintaining half-smiles and persistently clutching a drink. Official biographies tend to downplay this habit, choosing instead to emphasize themes of heartbreak, exile, and dignity. Yet, testimony from staff, friends, and the odd diplomat told a different story. A hollow man who relinquished a throne, then spent the remainder of his years dulling the gravity of that choice. However, Edward was not the only Windsor harboring a hidden dependency behind charm and ceremony. Down the lineage, another royal, uniformly smiling and adorned with floral hats, quietly fostered her own liquid indulgence. This time, the public couldn't help but adore her for it. 9. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, a figure of enduring grace and unwavering presence, she was the nation's beloved grandmother, a beacon of strength during the darkest days of wartime. With a warm smile and pearls aligned impeccably, she waved from bomb-ravaged balconies, embodying resilience to the British public. Yet, to many, her name felt less like that of a person and more akin to an ornate structure cradling the weight of history. To Britain, she seemed eternal, always poised, always with her trusty handbag, seemingly unbothered. Yet hidden beneath the facade of post-war charm and stoic wartime resolve lay a more profound reality. For decades, the Queen Mother partook heavily in drinking, a habit shrouded from the public eye. Royal life in the early 20th century was steeped in a culture of alcohol, gin before lunch, wine with food, and brandy to sweeten the night, a mere Tuesday for the royals. But for her, drinking was a personal refuge, a necessary shield against the tragedies of 2 world wars, family crises, and the heartbreak of losing her cherished husband, George VI. The everyday routine she followed was well known among her inner circle, including palace staff and secretaries. Mornings would start with a simple gin and jubit, enough to ease the day ahead. As time progressed, lunchtime would unveil the flowing wine, while dinner tables were never devoid of stronger spirits, all meticulously handled until they weren't. Her relationship with alcohol manifested in subtle signs: frequent forgetfulness, sameness in stories, and slurred speech, all carefully omitted from public accounts. Staff were directed to accommodate her needs, adjust schedules, or steer her toward lighter commitments when necessary. Like many royals preceding her, she was enveloped in a world of illusion, expertly managed by those around her. Yet, in the public eye, she remained unwavering, known to the people as the Queen Mother, a comforting figure, unfazed by scandal. At charity events, in hospitals, and garden parties, she exuded warmth and authenticity, masking a shared dependency that no one dared to name. Remarks in private letters after her passing hinted at her conviviality. Tales of her love for potent cocktails and remarks about keeping up with her pace alluded to a habitual reliance that was both practical and deeply ingrained. She surpassed the lifespans of many peers, leaving the world in 2002 at 101. The narrative surrounding her life painted her as beloved and ever gracious, but grace often masks inner turmoil. Following her on the throne was a new royal, a former naval figure whose rugged demeanor and blunt nature presented struggles that were far less elegant. His existence stood in stark contrast to the grace that defined the Queen Mother, carving out a narrative that was raw and captivating in its complexity. 10. William IV. Long before his ascension to the throne, William IV was no mere figurehead. He was a sailor in every sense of the word. A genuine serviceman in the Royal Navy, he scaled rigging, swore like a seasoned mariner, and found solace in hammocks. His naval career was indeed vivid, albeit touched by a hint of romanticism in hindsight. Yet, if the military offered him any lesson, it wasn't about discipline. It was how to drink like a man who never foresaw wearing a crown. Known as the Sailor King, he was George III's third son, living much of his early years as though kingship was a distant dream. This belief offered him an unusual sense of freedom. He indulged openly, partied hard, and fathered at least 10 illegitimate children with the Irish actress Dorothea Jordan, with whom he shared 2 decades. Initially, his lifestyle didn't attract scandal. It was simply William being himself, rough around the edges, full of life, always eager for another drink. Alcohol became the heartbeat of his existence. From his naval days, he grew a drinking tolerance that astonished even the toughest sailors, favoring rum, brandy, and fortified wines, consumed in staggering amounts that were never questioned. Unlike later royals who cloaked their indulgences in secrecy, William drank candidly and frequently, taking pride in his habits, until destiny intervened. With his elder brother, George IV, passing without a rightful heir, William, who never aspired to the throne, was thrust into kingship at 64, an age that felt late even for royalty. Suddenly, the need for a polished public image arose. Advisors anxiously sought to reshape the reputation of a man who had long evaded it. His drinking now spun in a new light, his irregularity recast as unconventionality. However, behind closed doors, the drinking continued unabated. His court, while less extravagant than that of his predecessor, could not conceal his penchant for alcohol, now shrouded from public scrutiny by staff dedicated to maintaining the facade. The king often exhibited unpredictable moods, especially later in the day. Aides attributed this to stress or fatigue, though the truth lay in his frequent inebriation before sundown. Diplomatic observers noted his confusion and irritability during state meetings, issues that scarcely penetrated the royal bubble. The press, adhering to long-standing rules of deference, remained mute. Toward the end of his reign, William's health deteriorated, afflicted by gout, insomnia, and digestive troubles, aggravated by years of heavy drinking. No interventions occurred, nor did any acknowledgement surface. Upon his death in 1837, tributes celebrated his humility and commitment, overshadowing the many bottles he had consumed. History, however, tends to resonate, especially within royal legacies. While William IV's excess was attributed to a sailor spirit, the monarch who followed him revealed a far more calculating kind of indulgence, one that scoffed at moderation and adorned addiction in regal wigs and sharp wit. In the annals of history, Charles II has often been dubbed the Merry Monarch. However, this merriment depended on certain complexities. His return to the English throne in 1660 marked an end to years steeped in civil war, puritanical governance, and pervasive uncertainty. Yet, this was not merely a political restoration. It heralded a renaissance for the senses. As London's theatres sprang back to life, courtiers shook off their dust-covered wigs, and Charles, after his lengthy exile, re-emerged, one hand grasping a crown and the other clutching a wine goblet. If his father, Charles I, perished from the harsh grip of royal absolutism, Charles II revelled in its joyous excesses. His court gained notorious fame throughout Europe, celebrated for its indulgence and flamboyant displays. Yet, hidden beneath the flamboyant surface lay the darker realities of his life's excesses, fueled in no small part by alcohol, medicinal potions, and a near-constant reliance on opiates masquerading as remedies. To his supporters, he appeared as a figure of wit, sophistication, and a sharp cynicism. His physicians, in contrast, engaged in a relentless battle to maintain his health. Reports suggest his daily alcohol intake began in the late morning and extended into the night, with choices that varied from claret and fortified wine to strong ales and even rare imports crafted solely for his indulgence. The boundary between revelry and dependence faded early in his reign and vanished completely as time passed. Despite these challenges, his image remained untarnished, partly due to his extraordinary knack for deflecting criticism with humor. He famously claimed, "I am the last man in the world to do things by halves," a statement few would contest. When whispers began to swirl around his indulgences, he leaned into this narrative, relishing the persona of a sovereign who favored actresses over advisors and drinking over duties. The public, wearied by the lifeless regime of Cromwell's protectorate, embraced the unfolding scandal like a breath of fresh air. However, the reality that lay beneath was infinitely more complex. Charles's health was frail at best. Endowed with chronic digestive issues, insomnia, and persistent fevers, he was treated with the common remedies of the era: laudanum, mercury-based tonics, and opiate-infused concoctions. Court physicians believed in achieving balance through purging and sedation, meaning the king was frequently subjected to bleeding, purging, or sedatives to maintain functionality. Laudanum, prevalent among the elite, was prescribed generously. It numbed his ailments, assuaged his fears, and, importantly, kept him obedient. By the late 1670s, concerns echoed through diplomatic channels regarding his increasing erratic moods and faltering memory, leading foreign ambassadors to avoid scheduling afternoon meetings. Courtiers soon learned to gauge his disposition the moment they entered his presence. Was he the charming monarch or the distracted, irritable figure already under the influence of drink and opiates? Even in his deteriorating state, however, his image remained paradoxically untouchable. He departed this world unexpectedly in 1685 at the age of 54, reportedly following a seizure. While historians have fervently debated the impact of his lifetime of indulgence, heavy metal treatments, and likely undiagnosed kidney or liver failure on his demise, the court's narrative downplayed these truths. His final words, laced with his characteristic dry wit, were said to be, "Let not poor Nelly starve," a nod to his mistress, Nell Gwyn. He met his end as he lived, steeped in theatricality and affection, leaving behind just enough enigma to discourage probing into the more difficult truths of his reign. However, such inquiries would resurface in later centuries, especially when another maligned king, reshaped by the writings of Shakespeare and shorn of the myths that shackled him, was revealed to have similarly relied on potent elixirs, not in the realm of theatre, but in the brutal theatre of war, exposing consequences far more immediate. Richard III, a name that echoes through time, enshrouded in dramatic spectacle and historical distortion. Regarded as the villain in Shakespeare's gripping tragedy, he emerges as a twisted figure, a hunchbacked usurper who clawed his way to power only to meet his demise, trampled under a horse. Yet beyond the theatricality, the exaggerated portrayals, and the sensational rediscovery of his skeleton in 2012, lies a lesser-known aspect of his life, entwined in the somber realities of medieval life and the management of unrelenting pain. Chronic suffering was Richard's companion. While the specifics of his condition continue to spark debate among historians, modern examinations reveal he suffered from adolescent-onset scoliosis, a severe curvature of the spine that caused him continuous discomfort and restricted his movement. In a harsh world that offered little kindness for those afflicted, Richard sought out the remedies available to him. Medieval medicine was anything but delicate. Treatments included tinctures, various herbal mixtures, and distillations, often infused with opiates. Ingredients like poppy extracts, henbane, and mandrake were concocted into what were referred to as sleeping potions, essentially early narcotics that numbed pain and eased tensions. These substances, while effective, carried the risk of addiction, a concept largely unexplored during his time, often framed as divine will or an essential means of survival. 15th century medical texts reveal a culture where powerful potions and syrups were routinely given to the aristocracy, particularly before battles or significant events. Though direct evidence of Richard's personal prescriptions remains elusive, much of it lost or edited by political adversaries, patterns arise from the circumstances of his life. His chronic pain, the tumultuous political landscape, disrupted sleep, alongside a court physician renowned for supplying potent relief, hint at possible reliance on such treatments. As his reign progressed, Richard exhibited increasingly erratic behavior. Scholars have speculated whether this was a response to grief, escalating stress, paranoia, or perhaps the effects of narcotics. Following the death of his wife, Anne Neville, in 1485, Richard withdrew further, his demeanour shifting to one of irritation and uncertainty, a stark contrast to his earlier commanding presence. These descriptors may come off as vague, yet when viewed through the lens of a monarch dealing with both political strife and physical suffering, they acquire new meaning. It's conceivable that, entrapped by pain and personal tragedy, Richard turned to opiate-based solutions, blurring the lines between reality and paranoia. His climactic battle at Bosworth Field stands as a testimony not just to the clash with Henry Tudor, but possibly also to the cloudiness brought on by substances that dulled his senses and compromised his judgment. Yet none of this complexity found its way into Shakespeare's narrative. The playwright had little need for subtlety where propaganda thrived. The Richard immortalized in his works was monstrous and theatrical, a stark departure from the man, shaped by relentless pain and substance dependency. The intricate truth of his life continues to emerge slowly from the depths of history, while the story of his queen-in-law, a German princess trapped in the calamity of royal politics, unfolds with far less drama, her struggles hidden behind courtly facades and whispers drowned in perfumed silence, leaving the world to misconstrue her plight as mere heartache. In the annals of royal history, few unions are as rife with farce as that of Caroline of Brunswick and George IV. Their marriage unfolds not as a tale of romantic love, but rather as a diplomatic disaster that spiraled dramatically into a long-standing scandal. This was no mere fairy tale. It was a collision of personalities, underscored by bitterness and public humiliation more akin to a Victorian drama than a royal alliance. Yet, beneath the headlines and courtroom skirmishes, there exists a less examined aspect of Caroline's life, her alleged struggle with alcohol. Caroline arrived in Britain in 1795, bound to George IV in an arrangement designed to alleviate debts and bolster the monarchy's faltering image. Upon first meeting, however, she encountered not a partner but a man who despised her immediately, tangled in an affair with another. Unrefined and refreshingly straightforward, her presence baffled the court, causing a swift rift. They hardly spoke soon after the wedding, and by mere months, they were effectively estranged. Despite this, their marriage trudged onward, a hollow shell of union. Public perception painted Caroline as vulgar and eccentric, overshadowing her isolation and the relentless embarrassment imposed by her royal family. As the years of estrangement passed, whispers of her alcohol consumption emerged. It started quietly, yet grew more pronounced as her clashes with the crown intensified. Observers noted her liberal drinking, often describing her flushed cheeks, most observable during evening gatherings. Accounts depicted her as erratic, with insiders hinting at late-night escapades involving tonic, suggesting a reliance on drink for solace rather than necessity. Her time in Italy during a self-imposed exile only fueled these narratives. There, away from the scrutinizing gaze of the British court, Caroline formed a new life filled with artists and friends, indulging in lavish dinners and abundant wine, her decorum seemingly diminishing year by year. Whether she sought numbness from heartbreak, monotony, or the very absurdity of her circumstances is open to interpretation. When Caroline returned to England in 1820, her desire to confront her exclusion from George IV's coronation ushered the so-called Queen Caroline affair into the spotlight. It became less a legal conflict than a national spectacle, with Parliament, the press, and the public entwined in a dramatic play, casting her as an emblem of anti-monarchist sentiment, championed by the working class yet reviled by the elite. Still, even supporters recognized a troubling truth. Her health was declining, her behavior unpredictable, and the palace reveling in exposing her flaws. Her sudden death in 1821, shortly after her exclusion from the coronation, was officially attributed to an intestinal obstruction. Yet, rampant speculation suggested poison, emotional breakdown, or the culmination of her heavy drinking. In the end, Caroline's legacy morphed into a cautionary tale, a defiant figure whose suffering was weaponized against her. Yet behind the scenes, she wasn't the only royal navigating palace intrigues. Nearby, a prince smiled and appeared composed, donning his own liquid armor, a man revered for loyalty, despite what the brandy might reveal. In the shadowy corridors of history, few figures have slipped into the background as seamlessly as Prince George of Denmark, the devoted husband of Queen Anne. This enigmatic consort occupied a role that was deliberately subdued, positioning himself just behind the throne. With a quiet demeanor, he attended ceremonies, nodding in compliance, commanding little attention unless it was warranted. His portrayal in paintings reflects a gentle and unpretentious spirit, while historical documents dub him as loyal, modest, and, somewhat ironically, consistently dull, attributes the court found favorable. Yet, behind this facade of unassuming calm lay a complex truth, whispered among royal biographers. George's understated persona may have been buoyed by a clandestine dependence on alcohol. Born into Danish aristocracy in 1653 and marrying into English royalty in 1683, George was crafted as the ideal consort, lacking ambition and presenting no threat, particularly as he was not English. His marriage to Anne was viewed as politically advantageous, lacking passion, with George's position carefully cultivated as secondary. Though he held the formal title of Lord High Admiral, it was a largely ceremonial role. While he kept a low profile, avoiding the glaring light of controversy in history, the records reveal a repetitive pattern, a litany of health issues, frequent absences from public life, and mentions of ailments such as gout and dropsy. These were often veiled references to physical decline or perhaps a long-term struggle with alcohol, as gout was a frequent ailment among those who indulged heavily, particularly in wine and spirits, of which George was said to have a fondness. Contemporaries noted that during formal engagements, he appeared drowsy and sluggish, often requiring a drink to invigorate him before making an appearance. Letters, not intended for public eyes, allude to a prince consort who needed stimulation from generous refreshments to engage with others. Though discreet in tone, these remarks reveal an awareness of George's political symbolism, if not his actual authority. Even Queen Anne, unwaveringly supportive of George throughout their life together, appeared to subtly acknowledge his struggles. Her correspondence increasingly referred to his ailments, and upon his passing in 1708, she was said to grieve deeply, yet she also expressed a sense of relief that he was liberated from his suffering, an utterance laden with implications of more than mere sorrow. The nature of his sufferings, whether physical pain or emotional distress stemming from dependence, remains ambiguous, but the hints are perceptible to those attuned to the nuances. Prince George's existence left little in the way of grand narratives. No stirring speeches, no pivotal wars, and no sweeping reforms. Instead, the remnants of his story linger in whispers, medical notes, private letters, and carefully crafted euphemisms. They paint a portrait of a man who might have turned to alcohol not for celebration, but for solace. Just beyond his era, another royal would follow a similar path, albeit with a different instrument of escape, one not hidden in silence, but rather orchestrated through sedatives, veiled by royal decorum, and preserved behind porcelain smiles. She would be the queen who endured the demise of empires, possibly sedated for the greater part of her reign. Queen Mary of Teck, the consort to King George V and a pivotal figure in the contemporary royal lineage, leaves an indelible mark etched in the annals of history. Her steadfast demeanour and vast understanding of royal decorum defined her character, standing resolute against the tide of world wars, the turmoil of abdications, and the broader disintegration of the 20th century. To the world, she epitomized the quintessential British queen, dignified, upright, and unflinching. Yet beneath this polished exterior, Queen Mary navigated her life under the silent influence of chemical calmness. Eschewing the ostentatious indulgences of her royal predecessors, her own habits quietly mirrored the same inertia but were trickier to discern. Her lengthy public presence cast her as a symbol of stability, the ironclad support within a dynasty that sometimes felt more symbolic than substantial. However, behind the ornate walls of Marlborough House and Buckingham Palace, this facade of control came with significant costs. Long-term use of sedatives and tonics, prescribed by the palace's medical staff, markedly infused her existence with a need for tranquility that the crown demanded. By the late Edwardian era, signs of her struggles began to surface. Court documents and her personal journals hinted at her recurrent episodes of nervousness, fainting spells, and crushing emotional fatigue, delicate phrases that only graced the surface of anxiety and depression in a woman who was often expected to maintain her composure amidst family upheavals of profound historical significance. This is where the tonics entered the picture. The royal medical practices of the day relied heavily on pharmaceutical remedies for unspeakable problems, often couched in euphemisms. Queen Mary routinely received nerve tonics, calming draught mixtures, and what her doctors discreetly classified as tranquilizing resources, various early sedatives concealed under the pretense of enhancing sleep or alleviating strain. Over time, documentation indicates a trajectory of escalating dosages, a growing necessity for restorative quietude around significant public engagements, and tightly regulated schedules that allowed her the recuperation she needed. To the outside world, her poise remained unwavering. By her husband's side, she seemed the very embodiment of tranquility, enduring her son Edward VIII's abdication with an enigmatic coolness. She survived 2 monarchs and navigated her public life without once faltering in front of the camera. Yet as she aged, it became evident that her routines were increasingly reliant on pharmaceutical aid. Heard whispers from within royal circles speak to her insistence on one-on-one time with her doctor before any emotionally charged event, and some attendants even devised coded phrases to reference her treatment times, ensuring she was always captured appearing her most composed. The porcelain-perfect image that defined her was no coincidence. It was a carefully curated persona, meticulously maintained at times through chemical means. Upon her passing in 1953 at age 85, just months prior to her granddaughter Elizabeth II's coronation, the floodgates of tributes celebrating her dignity and grace opened wide. And while they were indeed true, some of that steadfastness stemmed from discreet bottles never referenced in those eulogies. Thus, this legacy of secrets continued, passed down through generations. Yet not all royal secrets remained buried. The next in line presented a stark contrast, living out loud with his drinking habits and unapologetic opinions, navigating a sphere where the cameras rarely ceased to roll. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, was the perfect contrast in a monarchy where King George V represented the stern, unyielding facade, and Queen Mary embodied porcelain elegance. Philip was the playful jester. His sly glances and gentle nudges were his trademark. A naval officer by training and the partner to the longest-reigning British monarch, he occupied a multifaceted role that included cutting ribbons and spending time with foot-and-mouth specialists. His sharp wit, dry, often sardonic, and occasionally crossing lines, made him unique, as he alone could roll his eyes in the presence of the Queen without repercussion. Yet while many whispered about his fondness for drink, it never surfaced in the formal reports. Everyone, however, was well aware of his habits. Philip drank not out of reckless abandon, but rather with the refined regularity of an aristocrat, enjoying his gin and tonic, a drink synonymous with British tradition. He also savoured beer, whiskey, and meticulously crafted cocktails. To those in the royal household, these moments of indulgence were simply embedded in their routine and lifestyle. Philip's upbringing, a tapestry woven with Greek royal lineage, exile, and wartime trauma, shape his approach. By 1947, when he wed Elizabeth, his charm was established, accompanied by a reputation for being undeniably hard to manage. As the years progressed, his charisma endured, as did his drinking habits. Those who served him, particularly during his naval days, often describe his consumption as robust, as he outdrank peers while maintaining a sharp demeanour. His glass seldom sat empty at official engagements, with frequent toasts during intimate dinners, and the stress of royal duties required a nightly drink that transformed from indulgence into necessity. While the term addiction never fit Philip, this lifestyle was woven into the fabric of tradition and masculinity, pure naval culture. As time passed, it became evident that his drinking was more than mere leisure. It played a significant role in his daily life. Close acquaintances noted the volatility in his mood after long days, where evening solitude and a well-stocked bar were mandatory retreats. The Palisades, skilled in their diplomacy, adapted their schedules accordingly. For Philip, managing alcohol consumption became intertwined with managing his public persona. Remarkably functional, wittier than ever even at 95, his longevity seemed to serve as a tacit endorsement of the lifestyle he never felt the need to apologize for. Yet, he wasn't alone in this narrative. His contemporaries, many of whom were royals nurtured in a world of repressed emotions and normalized excesses, shared similar struggles. One of his quieter brothers-in-law, seldom spoken of or photographed, bore the same weight. But unlike Philip, he lacked a global platform. Instead, he had only solitude and the bottle to contend with. In the intricate tapestry of royalty, Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, emerges as an almost forgotten figure, overshadowed by the grandeur of his lineage. As the third son of King George V and Queen Mary, he was defined by his quiet demeanour. Lacking the charm of his brother Edward or the steadiness of Bertie, Henry was neither scandalous nor enshrined in the public's adoration. He was, in many ways, a mere placeholder in a royal narrative where expectations loomed large. Born into opulence and elevated within the walls of grand palaces, Henry's life was meticulously choreographed, steering him toward military service and diplomatic roles, stripped of any real agency in defining his path. He dutifully obeyed, smiled when necessary, and discreetly retreated when it suited the occasion. His role was one of support, a silent backdrop to the vibrant dramas playing out around him. Yet beneath this quiet facade lay a compelling story of struggle. Accounts from those who knew him reveal a slow but evident descent into a reliance on alcohol. By the time he reached middle age, his connection with spirits was both steady and discreet. Publicly polished yet privately known for his afternoon drinks and heavy pours at night, Henry's life unravelled in whispers. His was not an expression of excess, but rather a profound yearning for relief from the burdens of royal expectation and the weight of perpetual insignificance. With a king for a brother and a glamorous duke for a sibling, Henry found his responsibilities diminishing as years passed, leading to an inner tumult masked by the facade of calm. Diagnosed with what physicians termed nervous exhaustion, a euphemism often used to veil deeper truths in royal circles, his health faltered under the pressure of an unending cycle of stress and sedation. While the specifics of his medical records remain unknown, biographers report that sedatives and alcohol became woven into the fabric of his existence. As his health declined further, marked by strokes and cognitive issues, the royal narrative continued its polished facade, portraying him simply as unwell. Ultimately, Henry became a delicate figure, gracefully guided through the final chapters of his public life. His passing in 1974 went largely unnoticed, devoid of scandal and headlines, closing the quiet chapter of a quiet existence. Yet his tale resonates with echoes of other royal narratives lost to time. A century prior, Queen Mary, known for her tragic beauty, sought her own solace through similar means, navigating the realms of opiates and exile in a world that asked far too much. In the annals of history, few figures evoke such a compelling blend of admiration and reproach as Mary, Queen of Scots. To her supporters, she emerges as a poignant heroine, intelligent, magnetic, and unjustly judged by the passage of time. Conversely, her opponents depict her as reckless and politically blind. For centuries, Mary has existed within this duality, straddling the line between legend and infamy. Yet, amid the drama of her forced abdication, her confinement, and her eventual execution, a more nuanced story lies beneath the surface. Hidden from the grand narrative is her quiet and tragic reliance on alcohol and medicinal opiates, an aspect of her existence often overlooked, yet still hotly debated today. Mary's life unfolded much like a Gothic tale. Crowned at just 6 days old, she was whisked away to France to grow up in the lavish courts of Renaissance Europe. Her education was unparalleled, her charm was legendary, and her beauty was frequently noted, though it concealed a body that began to betray her over the years. The gnawing effects of chronic pain plague her adulthood. Historical records mark her with various ailments, incessant headaches, gynecological issues, and sleeplessness. These struggles were managed through the typical medical practices of the 16th century, incorporating remedies like laudanum, opium tinctures, and powerful herbal tonics containing ingredients we regard as perilous today. It's believed that these substances first became part of her regimen during her upbringing in the French court, where aristocratic women commonly received opiate prescriptions for emotional and physical distress. As her personal life unraveled, marked by the murder of her second husband, Lord Darnley, her scandalous marriage to Bothwell, and her eventual imprisonment by Elizabeth I, her dependence on these substances intensified. Captivity, rather than alleviating her malaise, compounded it, subjecting her to isolation, anxiety, and further deterioration. The letters penned during her captivity often reflect her ongoing health issues, chronic sleeplessness, and her reliance on various remedies, a term broad enough to include anything from herbal tea to powerful sedatives. Mary's loyal custodians, including the Earl of Shrewsbury, frequently noted her requests for comforting tonics. These were not mere indulgences but rather a crucial part of her survival. Accounts hint that without her tonics, her functionality dramatically waned, leading to mood alterations and withdrawal-like symptoms in their absence. While histories may champion her dignity in captivity and her regal presence amidst adversity, sustaining that facade likely demanded more than mere resolve. Her medicinal needs, obscured by time and royal pretense, depict a resilient woman who, despite her keen intellect and political aspirations, succumbed to a life dulled by routine sedatives rather than sheer force. When Mary faced execution in 1587 after nearly 20 years of confinement, the imagery surrounding her death, the crimson dress, the martyr-like pose, masked the quieter dependency that existed long before her dramatic end. Publicly portrayed as a queen undone by the treacherous tides of politics, privately, she may have been undone by relentless pain and grief, seeking refuge only in the limited relief permitted by her captors. Her legacy, shrouded in myth, speaks to a deeper truth that addiction resides not in grand narratives but in the hushed corners of existence, much like her successor, a king revered for uniting realms, who also kept his own medicinal vices hidden away. James Cerne, the Sixth of Scotland and the Eye of England, stood as a pivotal figure in history. He unified crowns, thwarted assassination attempts, and lent his name to the most renowned English translation of the Bible. Yet, while known as James I of England and previously as James V of Scotland, he was a man of stark contradictions. He was both brilliant and paranoid, devout yet superstitious, learned yet socially awkward, governing with both his pen and scepter. Yet, a less visible side reveals a troubling reliance on potent spirits and narcotics, a dependency veiled by the ceremonial life at court and the medical understanding of the Jacobean era. Ascending to the English throne in 1603, he succeeded Elizabeth I, heralding the rise of the House of Stuart. To the public, he epitomized the Renaissance monarch, articulate in Latin, zealous about theology, and driven to publish pamphlets spanning a variety of topics from kingship to witchcraft. Behind this facade, however, James grappled with a plethora of health issues: arthritis, kidney stones, gout, digestive troubles, migraines, and what contemporaries termed melancholy, a vague term encompassing elements of anxiety and fatigue. To cope with this relentless array of afflictions, he relied on his physician's prescriptions, which included a changing assortment of potent herbal remedies, opiate elixirs, and the traditional pain relief of the time, alcohol. His daily intake of fortified wines, spiced cordials, and brandy wasn't deemed scandalous. In fact, it was encouraged. Within court society, the lines between medicinal consumption and recreational imbibing blurred. If a tonic aided the king's sleep or made council meetings bearable, it was labeled as medicine. However, what set James apart was his extreme reliance on these substances. His personal correspondence often mentioned his need for remedies and strong waters to ease his maladies. Visitors noted his drowsiness or lack of focus during meetings, especially in the afternoons, with many remarking on his wine-laden scent in the evenings, regardless of where the formal dinners occurred. These quirks, framed as eccentricities, created an image of a man heavily reliant on these substances for his daily existence. James' physicians recognized this troubling pattern, documenting attempts to control his ingestion through alternative remedies such as enemas and fasting regimens, yet James clung to the stronger elixirs. Tinctures imbued with opium, possibly labeled as elixir vitae or soothing draughts for decorum, were part of his remedy repertoire. Like many royals across eras, James did not consider these aids as addictive but rather necessary tools underpinning the divine right of kings. As he aged, physical decline became increasingly evident. By the early 1620s, James was in near constant agony, with swelling joints and a waning appetite, and his capacity to focus and counsel diminished. While public appearances aimed to uphold his regal image, the palace witnessed the gradual unraveling of a once vibrant mind. Yet, through the turmoil, the flow of tinctures and tonics remained uninterrupted. James II passed away in 1625, purportedly from a stroke, although historians now suggest the chronic toll of his health problems were exacerbated by years of alcohol and opiate dependence. Official accounts celebrated a wise monarch's serene exit, flanked by dutiful attendants, conveniently omitting the substances that had bolstered him yet also dulled his faculties. This legacy of dependence intertwined with royal prerogative persisted, manifesting most vividly in a queen who grappled with absolute authority in public while nurturing profound private sorrows, a woman whose visible devotion contrasted sharply with her quiet search for solace. In the shadows of history stands Queen Victoria, a symbol of an expansive empire, renowned for her formidable presence and enduring legacy. Her life, shrouded in the somber hues of her iconic black dresses and solemn widowhood, spoke of stability amid rampant imperial growth. For a vast territory enchanted by her image of unwavering discipline, Victoria was undeniably the monarch. Yet, beneath this facade lay a more intimate struggle, one she masked with the help of palace doctors, a reality only whispered about long after her departure from this world. Crowned at the tender age of 18 in 1837, Victoria's reign spanned over 63 years. This era witnessed monumental shifts, industrial advances, global colonization, and a culture redefining monarchy itself. However, privately, she grappled with emotional instability and physical frailty, resorting to remedies regarded as commonplace in her time. Her reliance on substances such as ladanum, morphine, opium tinctures, and alcohol-based tonics only intensified following the tragic death of her beloved Prince Albert in 1861, which plunged her into an abyss of grief and psychological unraveling. Stricken by loss, Victoria retreated from the public eye, forever donning mourning attire. Insomnia, depression, and chronic pain became her unwelcome companions. In her letters, meticulously edited by her biographers, emerged the portrait of a woman weighed down by sorrow, desperately seeking to navigate the rigorous demands of her monarchy. As the royal doctors intervened, the first of which was LDM, a potent blend of opium and alcohol that was commonly prescribed for various ailments, her personal treatment regimen began to mirror that of a 19th-century apothecary. Victoria's plight is complicated by the thin line separating prescription from dependency. In her era, such medications were not viewed with the same scandalous lens they might be today. Rather, they were celebrated in advertisements and sought after by society's elite. These opiate-based remedies integrated seamlessly into daily life but, inevitably, fostered tolerance and, in turn, dependence. Her journals painted a vivid picture, with recurring mentions of sleep drafts, nerve tonics, and night mixtures. Notably, palace physicians adjusted her dosages with discreet regularity, integrating alcohol into her meals and routines without suspicion. In her later years, Victoria became entrenched in ritual. The medication ritualized her days, governed by trusted attendants who dispensed her remedies as far as her physical ailments, sciatica, failing vision, were concerned. Yet her emotional reliance on these mixtures went mostly unquestioned. Life continued. She penned letters and signed decrees, proudly wearing her crown despite her hidden struggles. Upon her passing in 1901, the official cause listed was cerebral hemorrhage, although her decline had been apparent long before. The medicines she once relied on vanished from sight, but their influence did not dissipate, carrying on in her lineage. A son would not only inherit her physical traits but also the shadowy legacy of addiction, a reality that extended beyond grief to grapple with a pain far more acute, treated with morphine as an unyielding routine. In the annals of royal history, few stories resonate with the weight of tragedy quite like that of Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany. Born in 1853, he was the youngest of Queen Victoria's 9 children, yet marked by an inherent fragility that would define his existence. Within the gilded halls of monarchy loomed the ominous shadow of haemophilia, a hereditary ailment that crippled his blood's capacity to clot and cast a long and harrowing pall over his life. Leopold, often relegated to the role of a royal exception, embodied wit and introspection, conscious of the delicate boundaries imposed upon him by his condition. An innocuous fall or a small bruise could spiral into a grave medical crisis, and thus the palace enveloped him in an atmosphere of caution. He was spared the vigorous sports his siblings enjoyed, closely monitored by his medical team, and shielded from the heavy burdens that typically accompanied royal stature. Yet, the pain remained relentless. Hemophilia wasn't merely an inconvenience, it transformed his joints into swollen sources of discomfort and gradually eroded his mobility. As he transitioned into his teenage years, Leopold found that the contemporary circles of Victorian medicine weren't particularly kind or varied with their remedies. But there was one potent solution that emerged during this time. Morphine, a groundbreaking discovery in the mid-19th century, quickly gained acclaim as a miraculous pain reliever. Opium pills and various syrup-like concoctions were paddled out by medical professionals for everything under the sun, from the seemingly trivial to the gravely serious. For Leopold, morphine was not a reckless indulgence but a meticulously administered necessity. His treatments began in his youth, often dispensed following episodes of serious internal bleeding or when the fiery pain in his joints rendered him motionless. As time unfolded, the dosages he received increased, incrementally but unmistakably. The royal physicians, distinguished figures such as Sir William Jenner and later Sir James Reed, meticulously balanced the management of his agony while attempting to preserve his functionality. However, once morphine entered his life, neutrality became an elusive notion. The body adapted, the mind began to crave. The threshold for relief continuously shifted, pushing to the peripheries of his existence. Despite these challenges, Leopold was the embodiment of grace. Exhibiting intelligence and artistic flair, he dedicated himself to academia and social causes, engaging with influential thinkers and advocating for better treatment options for the disabled. His reliance on morphine, however, remained shrouded in secrecy, a neatly tucked acknowledgement of his medical need that the public would never come to know. It was a controlled environment that enabled him to execute his royal duties, albeit with a tangible sense of sacrifice beneath the surface. As the 1880s dawned, Leopold's health began to decline more severely. The episodes of bleeding mounted, and each step became a trial. Yet, he soldiered on, fulfilling his royal role. In 1884, while recuperating in a spa, a favoured aristocratic refuge, he suffered a fateful slip that led to a cerebral hemorrhage, taking his life within hours at the tender age of 30. The palace issued a statement, deeming it a tragic accident, which it truly was. Yet, within that sentiment lay the haunting backdrop. Leopold had languished in the paradox of royal duty coupled with corporeal agony, and morphine acted as a silent partner in his otherwise polite existence. Moreover, he was not alone in this struggle. Another of Queen Victoria's children, distanced from the line of succession but similarly ensnared by physical challenges, sought solace in a different shadowy realm, relying on a chorus of viols and a silence that seamlessly complemented her royal heritage. Princess Alice, the Grand Duchess of Hesse and Queen Victoria's second daughter, was a figure of profound empathy among her siblings. Unlike her brother, known for his headlines, or her sister, who thrived for decades, Alice dwelled within a quieter, emotionally open existence. She straddled the line between the weight of royal expectations and the shadows of personal loss, her sensitivity to the plight of others often leaving her overwhelmed by her own afflictions. Beneath her grace and maternal love lay deeper struggles, chronic illness and an escalating reliance on sedatives and morphine, disguised as acceptable medicinal treatment of the time. Born in 1843, her life took a rapid turn for the caregiver following the death of Prince Albert in 1861, a tragedy that shattered the royal family. Contrary to what one might expect, it was Alice who stepped in to console her grieving mother instead of the eldest sibling. This bond with sorrow would shape Alice's outlook on life and her dedication to public service, particularly after her marriage to Louis IV, the Grand Duke of Hesse, in 1862. Upon arriving in Hesse, Alice faced the stark realities of her new life, detached from the safe confines of Buckingham Palace. The ducal existence was laden with financial strain and political tension, compounded by the responsibilities of nurturing a large family. Over 13 years, she welcomed 7 children in quick succession while also managing hospitals and launching women's welfare initiatives amid troubling outbreaks of typhoid and diphtheria. The burden was admirable but took a toll on her health. Her correspondence from that time reveals a woman often drained, fatigued, and enduring various ailments, including severe headaches and nerve pain. Misdiagnosed as mere nervousness, these issues led to routine prescriptions of sedatives and morphine, seen as necessary treatments rather than scandalous choices. These medications, whether through drops, injections, or including them in foods, allowed Alice to keep up with her royal duties, and for a time she persevered. Yet, as reliance on these substances grew, so did her physical fragility. Later letters from her nurse indicate an increasing dependence on these mixtures for sleep and to manage anxiety before public appearances. Despite her weakening state, Alice maintained the stoicism expected of women in her position. Tragedy struck in 1878 when a diphtheria outbreak affected her home, claiming the life of her youngest daughter, Marie, while still in Alice's embrace. Not long after, Alice also succumbed to the disease, passing on December 14th, the anniversary of her father's death, at just 35 years old. Her obituary lauded her compassion and charitable efforts, overlooking the troubling realities of her life with sedatives. Alice, like many royals of her time, was permitted to be viewed as tragic but not as a person suffering. Yet, her lineage carried a profound humanity. One of her descendants, raised amidst the complexities of exile and nobility, would navigate a similar path between composure and reliance, where the hidden truths involved not just medicine, but the intricacies of power itself, a secret worth safeguarding at all costs. In the annals of history, one cannot overlook the life of Victoria Eugenie of Battenberg, known simply as ENA, a British princess who would ultimately find herself as a queen in exile in Spain. Her existence straddled 2 realms, 2 legacies, and an inherited predicament that shadowed her every step. A granddaughter of Queen Victoria, ENA served as a symbolic connector between the vast empires of her time. Yet her diplomatic mission bore heavy burdens. Beneath her ornate regalia lay a woman confronted with profound personal suffering, declining health, and a reliance on medications like morphine and sedatives, a quiet addiction, stigmatized yet tolerated in royal circles. Born in 1887, ENA hailed from a lesser branch of the British royal family. Though noble, she was not atop the hierarchy. Her mother, Princess Beatrice, was the final daughter of Queen Victoria, while her father, Prince Henry of Battenberg, tragically passed away, casting a shadow of grief over ENA's formative years. The serene environment of Osborne House offered little respite from her twisted fate, which took a dramatic turn in 1906 with her politically orchestrated marriage to King Alfonso XIII of Spain. This union required her conversion to Catholicism and thrust her into the complexities of the Spanish court, where, amid fierce challenges, she bore children, some afflicted by the haemophilia that haunted her own family lineage. Alas, the toll of this heritage soon plagued her reputation in Spain, where the press scrutinized her and elite factions turned against her. Her marriage to Alfonso deteriorated further as his infidelities and political struggles strained their bond. Nevertheless, ENA put on a brave front, embodying grace and determination as she fulfilled her royal obligations. Yet inside, her health began to plummet. Medical documents reveal a tumultuous inner life filled with exhaustion, anxiety, and digestive distress, leading Spanish doctors, under immense pressure to keep the Queen appearing functional, to prescribe her a steady cocktail of sedatives and morphine. As the 1920s ushered in political chaos in Spain, her reliance on medicine intensified. When monarchy in Spain fell in 1931, Iénée fled, seeking refuge in France and later settling in Switzerland. But the sanctuary of exile offered her no comfort. Although stripped of her title, she was still ensnared in the royal expectations of hosting and public appearances, even as her health continued to decline. With an ever-increasing dependency on morphine and other pharmaceuticals, her emotional detachment later garnered her a reputation for coldness, perhaps more the result of medication than true disposition. Iénée's life concluded in 1969, her royal legacy overshadowed by personal struggles largely concealed beneath the pomp of regal decorum. While the press heralded her as the final queen consort of pre-republican Spain, a paragon of strength and elegance, the deeper narrative remained obscured. Found amidst prescription notes, hidden syringes, and the prolonged silences between royal functions lay the whispers of her existence. And while Iénée grappled with her duty, her great-grandfather faced a different plight. His notorious madness and medicinal compulsions became folklore. Yet, shrouded in delicate handkerchiefs and the quietude of devoted doctors, a subtle addiction lingered, forever intertwined with the unfolding human experience behind the crown. George III is often remembered as the unstable monarch who lost America, a king forever linked to bouts of madness, disarray, and rather unfortunate wigs. His image has been shaped into that of a tragic figure, overshadowed by his mental unraveling and the loss of colonies. Yet, lurking beneath this familiar narrative is a lesser-known truth: the significant role that narcotics and alcohol played in his long-term struggle with both physical and psychological ailments. Born in 1738 and ascending the throne in 1760, George III began his reign with great promise, an earnest and intellectually engaged ruler devoted to moral integrity, quite unusual for a Hanoverian monarch. Sober in both demeanor and lifestyle, he starkly contrasted with his predecessors, who indulged heavily in drink. However, abstaining from vice does not guarantee protection from vulnerability. The true challenges would arise not from his lifestyle choices but rather from his medical treatment. By the late 1780s, the signs of George's declining mental health became alarmingly apparent, marked by extended episodes of what were then termed nervous disorders, manifestations of mania, puzzling behavior, insomnia, and emotional turmoil. Historians and medical experts have since pondered over these symptoms, speculating about diagnoses from manic depression to schizophrenia, or even a combination of ailments. Regardless of the true nature of his condition, the royal solution was evident: maintain silence, keep him functional, and shield him from the public gaze, all reliant on medication. In Georgian Britain, the common remedy for various ailments, physical and mental alike, was laudanum, a concoction of alcohol and opium promising rest and tranquility. George III received increasing doses, often accompanied by herbal remedies and purgatives intended to restore balance to his body. Unfortunately, this approach often exacerbated his problem, compounding his confusion and disorientation. The prevailing belief dictated that if he could find restful sleep, he was on the mend, and if he remained quiet, he was progressing. Court documents and correspondence from that era depict a king heavily medicated and frequently restrained. His mental decline transformed into a public secret, cleverly managed through a blend of medications, isolation, and diversions. Yet what remained unsaid was the prolonged use of these substances, not as immediate fixes but as routine remedies. The king, in many respects, was medicated into a state of invisibility. Following his ultimate mental collapse in 1810, George was maintained in a strictly controlled stupor at Windsor Castle, where his health steadily deteriorated. His sight failed, his hearing waned, and his speech grew increasingly disjointed. Throughout this time, his dedicated, yet silent, physicians adjusted his treatments, mixing new remedies while preserving the royal facade through diligent pharmaceutical compliance. He would remain in seclusion for another decade, ultimately passing away in 1820, blind, deaf, and estranged from the empire he once governed. While the nation mourned their king, they conveniently overlooked the long, medicated decline that enveloped his final years. His official portrait remained dignified, the bottles concealed, and although tales of madness populated history, the narrative of addiction remained buried. When an illness is conspicuous, treatment often escapes scrutiny, and the existence of royalty blurs the line between therapy and dependence entirely. As the Georgian era waned, another queen ascended, a figure whose powdered visage and gentle diplomacy cloaked a lifetime of discreetly veiled habits, prescribed in hushed tones and adorned in finery. 25. Queen Caroline, the spouse of George II, stands out in British history as one of the most politically savvy queen consorts. She was sharp, sophisticated, and intellectually more nimble than her husband, positioning herself as an influential force at the royal court. Queen Caroline of Ansbach was not merely a figurehead. She was a vital architect of policy, adept navigating the political landscape and shaping the monarchy's image during a time of significant change. Yet, behind her brilliance and enlightened ideals lay a more subdued struggle, an escalating reliance on potent painkillers and alcohol that intensified with age, illness, and the unspoken demands for queens to bear their burdens silently. Born in 1683 into a noble German family, Caroline immersed herself in rationalist philosophies and progressive ideas from a young age. An avid reader and host of theological discussions, her circle included prominent scientists and freethinkers. Upon marrying George Augustus, who would become George II, she infused the British court with a modern European perspective. However, alongside her intellectual vibrancy, she faced growing physical ailments. By her late 30s, chronic health issues, particularly reproductive complications, began to plague her. After delivering 8 children, often under arduous conditions, she developed what were regarded as womb troubles, leading to persistent pain and restricted movement. Royal physicians of the time, while maintaining a facade of discretion, employed various remedies, including opiate tinctures, herbal sedatives, and strong liquors often prescribed for childbirth recovery and other ailments. In Caroline's case, continual suffering rendered her prescriptions a daily ritual rather than an occasional relief. Evening tonics became essential while drafts were administered before she appeared publicly. Despite this unrelenting discomfort, she continued to fulfill a substantial political and ceremonial role, even acting as regent during her husband's absences and influencing British policy from behind the throne. The court praised her admirable strength, yet the true extent of her reliance on these substances remained shrouded in silence. As the years advanced, Caroline's health deteriorated further, suffering from what historians now believe were internal infections intensified by past childbirth injuries. Her need for pain relief escalated, but, as was customary for royal figures, her tribulations went unspoken. In 1737, as she faced grave illness, a royal physician noted Her Majesty's rest was aided by tincture, a likely euphemism for the opiate concoctions she had come to rely upon. Later that year, she passed away after enduring what was officially termed a long and brave illness. In her final moments, George II was by her side, reportedly mourning her loss and proclaiming her to be the finest woman in existence. The public celebrated her intellect and bravery, remaining blissfully unaware of the concealed bottles beside her bed, the quiet elixirs that had sustained her through decades of royal obligations. In stark contrast to Caroline, her descendant would confront pain and turmoil in a much harsher manner, his body succumbing to the dual weight of power and suffering, while his own cabinet became a tumultuous mix of medications and concoctions in a similar struggle. Henry VIII. Instantly recognizable, he stands as a towering figure in British history, famed for his 6 marriages, his monumental break from the Catholic Church, and his fierce, tempestuous personality. Throughout the ages, he has been etched into memory as a complex and captivating force. Yet, beneath the grandeur of his reign, which dramatically altered England's societal and religious landscape, lay a deteriorating body, once a powerful empire now in decline. Plagued by chronic pain, persistent wounds, and waning mobility, he turned to an increasingly strong mix of medicinal alcohol, opiates, and herbal sedatives to maintain the facade of an effective king. While the world viewed him as an unstoppable titan, the reality painted a much grimmer portrait. In his youth, Henry was the epitome of vitality, a Renaissance prince, brimming with athleticism, charm, and remarkable talents in music and sport. Yet, as time marched on and the pressures of politics took their toll, this polished image began to crack. By the time he reached his 40s, Henry was beset by leg ulcers, debilitating gout, migraines, insomnia, and a slew of stress-related health issues, which scholars ponder may have included type 2 diabetes and hypertension. His infamous temper, known for its volatility, may have been exacerbated, perhaps even ignited, by his continual physical suffering and the effects of his treatments. His physicians, most notably Thomas Wendy and later William Butts, bore the heavy responsibility of not just keeping him alive, but ensuring he retained his authority. In the 16th century, this meant relying on a powerful mix of remedies, including opium tinctures, poppy-based sleep aids, alcohol-infused tonics, and potent herbal concoctions designed to dull pain and calm the restless mind. These substances, rather than being termed drugs, were referred to as cordials or elixirs, but their potent nature was undeniable. Extensive court records logged his medicinal intake, revealing ingredients such as diarrhodium, a syrup derived from poppy heads, water often laced with opiates for relief, and fortified wines enriched with herbs to alleviate pain. His doctors crafted bespoke pastes and poultices for his ulcers, some of which contained narcotic elements intended to soothe his excruciating discomfort and tackle inflammation. As the 1540s unfolded, Henry's reliance on these potions became increasingly apparent to those around him. Observers noted his sluggishness in thought, clouded speech, and lingering fatigue. Meetings were oftentimes postponed or kept brief, and the king's navigations through his residences were meticulously arranged around the constant availability of medical support and private chambers for rest. Nevertheless, the legend of Henry's might survived, partly thanks to the expert applications of sedation he employed. Alcohol was woven deeply into the fabric of Tudor life, with wine and ale favoured greatly over water. However, as Henry's health began to falter, his consumption rose exponentially. Each night, spiced wines and brews blended with therapeutic herbs became routine, dulling pain and quelling nerves frayed by the relentless tide of court machinations and betrayals. Upon Henry VIII's death in 1547 at the age of 55, it is said his body was so bloated and infected that preparations for his burial were hurried. While his court mourned a great ruler, they spoke little of the bottles, powders, and potions that had been his silent companions through his final years, not out of shame, but because such dependence was simply a price to be paid for sovereignty. He was not alone in bearing these burdens. His son, though less physically imposing and quieter in demeanour, would later be remembered for his control and calculated approach. Beneath his austere appearance hid a reliance on remedies that blurred the lines between discipline and debilitating dependency, inviting us to ponder the true cost of power in the Tudor dynasty. Henry VIII is often seen as the figure who brought an end to the Wars of the Roses, instilling a grim stability in a kingdom that had seen much turmoil. His long, austere visage, watchful and unsmiling, symbolizes the dawn of the Tudor dynasty, a careful craftsman of order amidst chaos. Yet, beneath this cold facade lay a man of fragile constitution, beset by paranoia, chronic ailments, and an increasing reliance on strong medicinal opiates and herbal remedies, masked by the genteel euphemisms that characterized the royal court. Born in exile and raised under constant threat, Henry's ascent to the throne was not one of inheritance, but of conquest, with all its accompanying repercussions. The rigors of conflict, compounded by the stresses of ruling a fractured nation and a genetic predisposition to illness, rendered him increasingly frail by his late 40s. His declining health began to plague him long before his demise in 1509, leading to a pressing need for the era's remedies, which he took with great methodical care. His household records reveal a steady influx of exotic medicinal herbs, concoctions, and syrups prepared by his loyal physicians and apothecaries, containing ingredients, now recognized as narcotics, like poppy derivatives, nightshade, mandrake, and other sedatives designed to induce rest, relieve pain, and soothe troubled minds. These substances were labeled as necessary, prescribed under the guise of care, but they evolved into a daily regimen, especially in his later years as he grappled with severe joint pain, likely gout, and persistent digestive issues. Henry VIII maintained a famously tight grip over his court, and historians speculate that his growing seclusion in his final years was spurred not only by suspicion but also the toll of long-term sedative use. His sleep became disturbed, public appearances became rarer, and his ministers started to manage more of the daily affairs. This pattern mirrors the subtle decline often wrought by dependence, a quiet withdrawal cloaked in royal protocol. Upon his death at 52, official narratives highlighted his discipline and legacy, portraying the accomplished king who had rejuvenated England's finances and assured its future with dignity. The heavy reliance on opiate-based treatments was conveniently omitted, as it fits seamlessly into the realm of royal medicine, echoing the patterns that would arise later, as his daughter-in-law would also make use of similar tinctures, albeit for a different kind of pain. In the annals of history, we find the story of Princess Charlotte Augusta, the cherished daughter of George IV. She was envisioned as the beacon of hope, the legitimate grandchild of George III, representing the Hanoverian legacy amid the chaos of her father's scandals, earning her the admiration of the public. Yet, tragically, at the tender age of 21, her bright flame was extinguished, her passing echoing like a samba finale to a grand tale. While her demise is often recounted as a straightforward tragedy related to childbirth, lurking beneath this narrative is an intricate tale revealing her entanglement with the arcane practices of royal medicine, hinting at an early dependence on L-Dinum for her emotional and physical unrest. Charlotte's upbringing unfolded amid the tumult of her parents' vicious separation. Her father, set to become George IV, tightly controlled her life, dictating her friendships and attire, while her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, faced the painful exile from their shared domain. This duality fostered a childhood rife with public scrutiny and private turmoil, leaving Charlotte with scant confidence and limited freedom to express herself. Correspondences penned by her nurses and advisors in her youth detailed her struggles, including unpredictable moods and anxiety, symptoms of what was then labeled as a nervous temperament. As she journeyed into her late teens, her doctors embraced the norm of aristocratic medical practices. They prescribed her L-Dinum for sleep, soothing syrups to quell her anxiety, and opiate tinctures for her menstrual pains and headaches, all deemed standard, if not innovative, for women of her stature. There's no record of indulgence, yet the evidence suggests these substances subtly became a regular part of her existence, administered with a routine nonchalance. During her brief union with Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, reports indicate that Charlotte began to find some emotional equilibrium, yet she continued to battle physical ailments, marked by fatigue and fainting spells. Physicians in her court remarked upon her delicate nerves, a veiled expression often linked to the justifications of regular sedative usage among women of her social rank. Ironically, Despite carrying the weight of the nation's aspirations, pregnant and ready to assume her role as queen, Charlotte's medical oversight relied on men well versed in antiquated obstetrics and liberal with their pain medications. The harrowing climax unfolded in November 1817, following a harrowing 50-hour labor that culminated in the birth of a stillborn son. Exhausted and blooded, lacking adequate postnatal care, Charlotte succumbed shortly thereafter. The official cause of death was scribbled as internal bleeding, yet contemporary medical historians have pointed to the possibility that the medications administered to her in the critical days preceding and during labor included L-dinam and other opiates, potentially overwhelming her frail constitution. A deep and profound mourning enveloped the nation as businesses shuttered and crowds grieved. Her father's devastation led to extensive memorial efforts, but still, the narrative endured of Charlotte as the emblematic princess, tragically felled by fate. The quiet vials she left behind faded from the story, yet her plight resonated within another royal figure, whose own journey mirrored a more sinister descent. His addiction was not just whispers in the shadows. It was flaunted at festive gatherings, exalted by comrades, yet obscured within the margins of monarchy. Prince Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, who later became King of Hanover, was never destined for the throne, particularly not in Britain. As the fifth son of George III, he was notorious in England for being the most polarizing of the royal siblings. Endowed with a deeply conservative mindset and a politically contentious nature, he was widely unpopular. But beneath the weight of his public persona, a blend of authoritarian myth and scandal, lay a hidden story of a concealed struggle with alcohol. This dependency, shielded from the official narratives, persisted throughout his years of exile and ultimately shaped his reign. Ernest's military path was typical for those of his royal stature, filled with ceremonial roles and intermittent combat, alongside a significant entrenchment in a drinking culture prevalent in the military elite. From a young age, he was known for an insatiable thirst for strong drinks, with brandy, port, and hefty German beers becoming his constant companions. What began as soft indulgence soon escalated into a troubling reliance. As his political aspirations intensified and the British throne slipped from his grasp, he channeled his efforts into strengthening his control over the Hanoverian electorate, culminating in his ascension to the throne in 1837, just as his niece Victoria took the British crown. In Hanover, free from the restrictions of London, his reign allowed unrestrained drinking. Records from his time often cited vague health issues, euphemistically described as liver ailments, irritability, or sheer exhaustion. His physicians recommended bitters and restorative wines, code for fortified alcohol intended to mask the decline of his health. Observers noted a visible change in the king, whose complexion grew more flushed and whose movements slowed with each passing year. Yet, this behavior drew no scandal, as loyalty in the court took precedence over personal concern. By the 1840s, Ernest's drinking had become an unspoken norm. Meetings were scheduled for the morning to accommodate his habits, speeches were succinct, and public appearances dwindled. Despite these challenges, he ruled with an unwavering grip, often supported literally by aides. Though never mentioned explicitly, alcohol lurked in the shadows of his governance. Upon his death in 1851, obituaries portrayed him as firm, principled, and loyal to tradition, conveniently omitting the truth of his dependencies. Ironically, a previous queen, one of England's most noted monarchs, had also depended on similar substances during her twilight years, her refined facade belying a shared struggle, as her hands, like Ernest's, trembled in silence. 30. Queen Elizabeth I, often referred to as the Virgin Queen or Gloriana, shone in portraits adorned with gold and an aura of near-mythical perfection. Over time, the narrative surrounding Elizabeth I has transformed her into an emblem, a figure cloaked in symbolism, propaganda, and posthumous reverence. Yet, beneath that opulent facade, lay an individual grappling with relentless pressures. The monarch battled chronic ailments, insomnia, and anxiety, turning to her court's physicians who offered a variety of opiate-laden remedies, painkillers, tinctures, and sleep elixirs that blurred the lines between necessity and addiction. Elizabeth's reign unfolded as a precarious tightrope walk amid foreign threats, religious strife, attempted coups, and succession fears. An abundance of stress could have made her the wealthiest sovereign in Europe. However, her private writings and the reports from ambassadors unveil a leader plagued by debilitating headaches, emotional turmoil, and relentless toothaches, symptoms that in a pre-modern dentistry world could send any ruler scrambling for relief. The royal physician's toolkit featured soothing balms, opiate tinctures, and sedative syrups, all customary treatments for noble women, particularly those who faced the rigors of aging. Yet, as her reign progressed, Elizabeth leaned heavily on these remedies, especially in her later years, when health concerns mounted amidst the weight of her responsibilities. Observers noted moments when the once vibrant queen appeared weary, her eloquence diminished, particularly during the tumultuous 1590s, a decade marked by rebellions in Ireland and dwindling resources. There were glimpses of fatigue and irritability, with the Queen often retreating into solitude. In these times, the medicinal tonics, some infused with opiates, likely offered her the much-needed fortitude to project her royal image. As Elizabeth advanced into her later years, her physical state deteriorated. Hair loss, tooth decay, fading eyesight, and achy joints led to stronger concoctions being prescribed. The new miracle drug, laudanum, found its way into her regimen, not daily, as she preferred control, but frequently enough that her attendants learned to prepare soothing draughts for her bedtime and calming balms before council meetings. By 1603, her final year, Elizabeth was nearly a shadow of her former self, both skeletal and emotionally fragile, reliant on these medicinal aids. She resolutely resisted resting for days, a defiant stance that concealed deeper fears and exhaustion, perhaps exacerbated by prolonged sedative reliance. Ultimately, she drew her last breath sitting upright, surrounded by courtiers too fearful to voice the truth. The legendary Gloriana had, in a sense, been sustained by the chemistry of her time. Her successor, James II, would also find solace in the depths of drink, motives shaped more by alienation and the tremors of an unstable reign than the ravages of age. 31. King James II of Scotland, a tapestry of conflict and isolation. The saga of King James II is marked by conviction meeting calamity. In a predominantly Protestant realm, he stood as a Catholic king, a military leader bearing the weight of unpopular decisions, his unwavering beliefs leading to a political tempest. But within the tumult of revolts and religious strife, a quieter truth threaded through James' existence, a long-standing affinity for heavy drinking that clouded his journey and lingered into his exile. Once, he was not the stern, intense figure etched in history. In his youth, he engaged in naval battles, roamed the diverse landscapes of Europe, and savoured rich wines and fortified spirits, much revered among the 17th century military elite. Drinking was interwoven into the fabric of camaraderie and masculinity. While he exhibited greater restraint compared to his brother, Charles II, James wasn't a stranger to indulgence. However, his drinking escalated during his tenure as Duke of York, an era punctuated by personal grief, political alienation, and mounting suspicion. His conversion to Catholicism, a secret held for years, intensified his solitude at court. Observers from foreign lands commented on his somber nature and melancholic demeanor, often accompanied by generous pours of wine during evening meals and discussions. When he ascended to the throne in 1685, the stakes grew higher. His push for religious tolerance for Catholics fueled a national outcry, leaving Parliament agitated and igniting rebellions. Yet through the mounting pressure, James drank steadily, not with the theatricality of his brother Charles, but with the weight of a man bracing for impending misfortune. His exile in 1688 further entrenched this pattern. Cast out during the Glorious Revolution, he found refuge in France, immersing himself in the complex dynamics of the exiled court of Saint-Germain, where piety and political maneuvering melded with profound despair. To his supporters, he was a martyr king. To his foes, a persistent burden. Those closest to him witnessed a man increasingly reliant on alcohol as a balm for disappointment, homesickness, and the daily indignity of seeing another occupy his throne. French officials observed, often with unease, his frequent indulgences, noting how much his mood was swayed by drink. Although not scandalous enough to carve out his legacy, it remained a constant presence, mostly overlooked. James II passed away in 1701 at the age of 67, after enduring a decline in health for years. His legacy morphed into a political warning, yet his personal narrative, one marked by quiet drinking, loneliness, and self-soothing, faded from view. Not dramatic enough to capture attention, nor useful enough for history, yet undeniably human. His successor, Prince Albert Victor, would inherit none of James's throne, but he would carry forward the quiet fragility. His life, shrouded in rumor even during his years, was shaped by anxiety, pressure, and secretive escapes that grew more pronounced as the monarchy grappled with the relentless task of crafting his public persona. At the heart of a faded royal narrative lies Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, a potential sovereign whose abrupt demise forever altered the British monarchy's trajectory. The firstborn son of Edward III and the elder sibling of George V, he was groomed for kingship, yet never grasped the throne. Instead, he became more a creature of gossip, enveloped in whispers of scandal, fragile constitution, and a life devoid of accomplishment but rich in speculation. Yet, buried beneath the layers of rumor lies a profound truth. Albert Victor was entangled in a quiet, chronic dependence on alcohol and sedatives, fostered by courtiers eager to uphold a facade of regal dignity. From his early years, affectionately called Eddie by his kin, he was marked by delicacy, physical frailty, frequent illnesses, and academic struggles that modern scholars believe may indicate a neurological or learning disorder. This delicate nature cast a long shadow over the palace, determined to present him as a vigorous future king. To combat his crippling anxiety, insomnia, and recurring health issues, his doctors resorted to the conventional Victorian remedies of bromide sedatives, opium preparations, and alcohol as supposed reinforcements for his constitution. By the time he reached adolescence, Eddie's dependence on these substances became evident. Staff members noted his bouts of drowsiness, erratic emotions, and inattention, symptoms dismissed as mere nerves rather than the substances impacting his mental state. As he matured, the palace tightened the reins on his public life and private choices, fearful that any chink in the royal armor would solidify the prevailing rumors of inadequacy. Yearning to break free from the suffocating pressures of royal expectations, Eddie found solace in nightlife, reveling in the company of aristocrats and thrill-seekers. Sanitized accounts from the time suggest a lifestyle rife with heavy drinking, late-night escapades, and an escalating reliance on sedatives, both to recover from excess and to cope with the mounting pressures of his expected role. His engagement to Princess Mary of Teck in 1891 was intended as an anchor in his tumultuous existence, yet ironically, it coincided with a steep decline in his health. He fell victim to influenza during the 1892 pandemic and passed away unexpectedly at the tender age of 28. The public mourned a prince who never had the opportunity to reveal his true potential. The palace hastily concealed his medical records, allowing the shadows of his dependency to recede into obscurity, overwhelmed by glorified portrayals and formal condolences. Meanwhile, the next figure in this royal saga, a devoted partner to Queen Victoria, faced a starkly different reality. His growing dependency on opiate-based medicines intertwined with his deteriorating health became too evident for the palace to mask, leaving only the option to soften the narrative. Prince Albert, the esteemed husband of Queen Victoria, emerged as a moral pillar during a time marked by ethical uncertainties. This serious figure, who championed the advent of central heating and was a fervent advocate for science, upheld the notion of respectability with a fierce resolve, as if Britain's very existence hinged on it. The Prince of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha became the master craftsman behind the modern representation of royalty, embodying industriousness, sobriety, and rationality, so quintessentially Victorian, yet, as his life waned, the weight of empire and family pushed him towards the very vices that his public image seemed to transcend: opiates, sedatives, and alcohol-infused remedies disguised as medical necessities. His early adult years were characterized by an unwavering discipline. He embraced early mornings, unending writing, curating exhibitions, delving into agricultural studies, and managing royal finances, all while drafting documents until his vision began to fail him. His relentless self-control was a source of admiration, but it also bred exhaustion. As consort to a queen, emotionally and politically tethered to him, Albert carried a burden that went largely unrecognized by those around him. By the late 1850s, his health began to falter, plagued by chronic stomach ailments, fatigue, and what now might be classified as depression. His correspondence grew anxious, his moods darkened, and the relentless pace he had maintained began to erode. In response to his deteriorating condition, royal doctors, adept in contemporary medical trends, introduced him to treatments used widely among the elite: laudanum for pain, morphine-laden syrups for restless nights, and alcohol-based tonics to restore his vitality. Albert, practical as always, embraced these interventions, believing them to be tools rather than indulgences. However, as his suffering intensified in 1861, the quantities of these medications escalated, not for pleasure, but in desperate efforts to endure. His routine remained unyielding, and his wife's emotional dependence persisted, leaving chemical solutions to bridge the gaps left by their reality. His final weeks were a cascade of physical decline and heavy sedation. While the prevailing diagnosis of the time was typhoid fever, contemporary historians speculate that Albert could have been grappling with a chronic illness like Crohn's disease or even undiagnosed cancer, conditions muted for years by the haze of medicinal remedies. In his last days at Windsor, palace physicians repeatedly administered opium-based treatments to soothe his pain and settle his disquieted mind. The prince, who had instilled lessons of temperance and duty in his children, succumbed at the tender age of 42, enveloped in a medicated fog. Queen Victoria, stricken with grief, would carry his memory throughout her lifetime. Yet, the image she nurtured of a noble, sanctified husband left no space for the stark reality of dependency. Bottles were discreetly cleared from sight, and his last prescriptions filed away into sealed royal archives. With Albert's passing, the narrative of royal dependencies continues, not with a dramatic flourish, but rather as a quiet, dignified silence, often concealed behind a polished facade.